Three, two, one. All right. Welcome to a new edition of Hockey Primetime. How are you? My name's Conor McKenna. I am the host of the program. Normally Saturdays from 5 to 7, but in the month of March, we have been moved to Sundays. And we're going up against Tiger Woods today. Good afternoon. How are you? Laura Saba is here with me as well. We're live from the Hockey Primetime studio in lovely Montreal, where the weather's been great. We've had a very nice month of March so far. What are we, the 11th of March? And it's basically been above freezing every day, which is really nice. But we got a little snow the last couple of days. I'm still dreading that we're going to get one more big one. I know a lot of people listening have been experiencing that in the Northeast. A lot of snow coming down in the last couple of weeks. So anyway, hope everybody's not slipping and sliding too much these days. Maybe on your way to a game or one of the, a couple. We still have a couple of games left on the schedule for tonight, but we've already got one in the books. Yes, that's why they play the games, right? The Blackhawks beating up on the Bruins, thanks to a couple of late goals from from Patrick Kane. And who was the other one? Was it Brent Seabrook, Duncan Keith? I don't know. I changed the channel as soon as the goal went in. The 3-1 was your final there. The Hawks beating the Boston Bruins. And I have never seen somebody toss a stick as far as Brandon Saad did when he got clipped with a high stick from Zdeno Chara. Dude got hit in the face with the stick and somehow tossed his own stick 25 feet away on the ice. It was a truly impressive sort of Olympic discus style toss. Laura Sab is the producer of the show. She's here with me today. How you doing, Laura?
I'm great. Thank you, Connor.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for coming by. Nice to have you here. And there's a couple of things I wanted to get to off the top of it. And one of them is the tank battle in the National Hockey League. The Canadiens, Montreal Canadiens, the hometown team here, picked up another loser point yesterday, something that they've been doing far too much of lately. And, they may again be sort of costing themselves spots in the draft. How's the tank battle looking after the Blackhawks' regulation win over the Boston Bruins today? Well, you've got the Arizona Coyotes, who are still running away with it with 53 points at the bottom of the standings, although they've been winning some games lately. I know they lost their last one, but they've got 6 wins in their last 10 games, and their terrible, embarrassing, awful season still looks like it could very well yield that top pick, although we learned last year not to count on anything when it comes to the draft lottery. The Sabres are 3 points behind Arizona for the worst record, to put it to you that way. The Senators are right there, nipping at their heels. They're 4 points behind the Arizona Coyotes for the worst record. And Canucks fans are wondering if maybe they'll get lucky. 6 points out. Montreal, a full 9 points out of the final spot there, which is going to be a very difficult amount to make up, especially if they are going to keep picking up points. So the Red Wings there, 10 points out, and then you got to go 11 for the Oilers, who are getting some really strong play out of Connor McDavid lately, even stronger than usual, and they've been sort of messing up their odds. But as we learned last year, the Devils went from, 5th best odds to 1st overall pick. They've tweaked the format, and it should be a lot of fun. I'm excited for the draft lottery. I really am. I think I don't know if it's been official. We heard April 26th as a potential date for it. So the draft lottery, something to look forward to. The Blackhawks, by the way, if you are a Hawks fan and you're looking at this type of thing, I mean, they're way out of it right now. They have the 9th worst record in the National Hockey League. So again, they'll still be in there in the lottery, and they definitely could move up spots. But any team that's picking up points right now isn't really doing themselves any favors. And at the same time, Boston wanted to win that game. Boston needed to and wants that home ice position in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. But that is your tank battle update, okay, for fans of bad teams. For fans of good teams, interesting to see that the 2 best teams in the National Hockey League are both we're both on streaks, and neither of them have lost a game in regulation in their last 10, the Lightning and the Predators. And last night, lo and behold, Nashville, who are just 2 points behind Tampa for the President's Trophy race, so to speak. Not that anybody cares about the President's Trophy. The Lightning, though, have won 5 games in a row. They've got 48 wins this season. That's an incredible number. And Nashville Last night, they finally had their 10-game losing streak snapped, and this was at the hands, once again, and this name's going to come up a few times today, of the New Jersey Devils. So the Devils are doing all right, and, well, we've got our playoff races in full swing, especially in the East, a fascinating race between Columbus and Florida for that final spot. Florida coming on really strong, and we're going to talk to people representing both of those teams. Well, I don't know if representing is the right word, but people who cover those two teams. But I did want to talk a little bit about the playoff format and what it's looking like right now and how bad the NHL's playoff format actually is. Because here's what's going to happen, okay? In the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs, so let's just say hypothetically right now that the season were to end today and the standings as they are what would dictate the spot. So Columbus gets in, meaning that Florida does not, and the Atlantic Division has just 3 teams in the postseason. So the Bruins play the Toronto Maple Leafs, which, sure, I mean, that's exciting, right? They want to see the Bruins and the Leafs play. It's a great rivalry, and we know it's been great in the playoffs in the past. But why should Toronto, with 87 points, more points than the Washington Capitals, the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Philadelphia Flyers, the New Jersey Devils, and the Columbus Blue Jackets? So Toronto with 87 points, like not just more, they've got 4 more points than the Caps, who lead the Metro Division. So why should Toronto, with the third best or the third most points in the conference, open up the playoffs on the road in Boston against a team that has the second most points in the conference? Essentially, you're pitting 2 versus 3 in the first round of the playoffs. If you're going to look at the old format of 1 through 8, 1 plays 8, 2 plays 7, 3 plays 6, so on and so forth, then right now you would literally have 2 playing 3 in the first round. It's absurd. And now, to be fair, I guess the division leaders being ranked the way that it used to work, I guess what you would have would be more of 3 versus 4 in the first round, if that makes any sense, right? Because Washington would be ranked second automatically because they would be division champions. But Toronto-Boston, and this is the thing that I have trouble balancing. I'm very excited for the playoffs. I'm already excited for the playoffs. I think it's going to be great. And in all likelihood, Toronto will play Boston. On the surface, as a fan, I say, great. That's really fun. I can't wait for that to happen. I'm looking forward to it. This is going to be wonderful. And then on the other hand, I say, well, why shouldn't we get Toronto-Boston in the second round or in the third round of the Stanley Cup playoffs, just in terms of fairness? Why should the Pittsburgh Penguins, who are, again, 5 points behind Toronto with the same number of games played right now, open up? And this is the other side of the coin. Pittsburgh gets to open at home if things go the way that they're going right now. So the Penguins and their fans will be happy about this because they get to open at home against the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, it's never going to be an easy series between those two teams, and we've got a very tight race at the top of the Metro Division. But Pittsburgh and Philly neck and neck. So again, you have sort of another old school rivalry, which is nice. But Pittsburgh gets a really nice matchup, I'd say. Frankly, I think, wouldn't you rather play Philly than play Boston in the first round? Of course. We know the Bruins are unbelievable. They've lost just 16 games in regulation all season long. And if not for the Tampa Bay Lightning's ridiculous season, I think a lot more people would be talking about how well the Bruins have done this year. But the Penguins, with 82 points, open up against Philadelphia at home. The Leafs, with 87 points, open up against Boston on the road. That seems profoundly unfair to me, based on the whole idea of the regular season meaning something. If the regular season is going to mean something, then the Toronto Maple Leafs, being fully 5 points clear of Pittsburgh, 4 points clear of Washington, deserves some sort of a reward. And opening on the road in Boston is not some kind of a reward. By the same token, you could say this about the Bruins. Now, the Bruins have 94 points this year, right? I mean, this is a very good team that's looking like they're going to have the second most points in the conference based on the way things are going right now. Now, the Bruins, they don't want the Leafs in the first round. They deserve a much more of a cookie-cutter matchup, namely New Jersey, Columbus, or Florida. One of those teams will probably end up playing against the Washington Capitals, and one of them is going to end up playing against the Tampa Bay Lightning. The Lightning are fine. The Lightning should be playing a lottery team, or not a lottery team, rather, but a wild card team is what I meant to say. But it just does not seem fair in the least to the people of Boston either, to the fans in Boston, to the players in Boston, to the people running that team in Boston. Why should they get the Leafs in the first round? They've had a great season. The reward for that is they face the third best team in the conference, rather than really what they should be doing is facing the seventh best team in the conference, which would be Jersey, Columbus, or Florida. None of those games are going to be easy, but you can't tell me you'd rather face Toronto in the first round than face Florida. Of course not. Florida's 12 points behind the Toronto Maple Leafs right now. So I do wonder about this, and I'm sure this makes sense to a lot of people, and I know I'm revealing the Eastern bias by only looking at the Eastern Conference for this, but it just seems like the playoff format right now is bad. And the National Hockey League is notoriously slow to make changes. And what makes me wonder if we're going to see a change is very basically the fact that it is Toronto and Boston who are going to be affected by this. Those are both very powerful markets in the National Hockey League. The Bruins are a powerful team. Boston is a big market, and Toronto is the center of the universe. Let's be honest here. That's a squeaky wheel right there in Toronto. If Toronto's getting jobbed, maybe there's something that will be done about the rules in the playoff format. Because as fun as it is to get these divisional matchups in the first round, frankly, in a merit-based system where the team with the most points should get the best matchup and at least a first round, a home playoff series. Geez, the Leafs have the third best record in the conference and they can't get a home playoff series? Doesn't make any sense. And I know that there is the concept of reseeding in the second round to figure out that type of thing. But the fact is they open up on the road, which just does not seem right. We'll see what happens here. And the Bruins, remember, two games in hand and a 7-point lead over the Leafs. I mean, that's almost insurmountable at this point. Toronto with 13 games remaining and the Bruins with 15. That's a lot of ground to try to make up over a relatively short period of time. But if this, and if this was happening to the Carolina Hurricanes or if it was happening to the Florida Panthers, with all due respect to those markets, I don't know if I would really expect that anybody would care that much or if anything would be done about it. But the fact is the hockey media is focused in Toronto more than anywhere else in the National Hockey League, and Boston has its share of coverage and fans, both fair weather and full-time fans of the Boston Bruins. So maybe something changes. Obviously not this year. And we know, again, the league is very slow to do things like this. But count me among those who votes for a change in the playoff format because this, just to reiterate, just seems profoundly unfair to the teams in the Atlantic Division that have, frankly, just been better than the teams in the Metro. The Metro is a better division, I would say. The quality of the division is better because there's so many crap teams in the Atlantic, right? I mean, just look at it. You got four teams in the mix for the Rasmus Dahlin in the same division. That's impressive, right? Whereas the Metro, you've got 5 teams very much in the mix, and the Carolina Hurricanes sort of threw in the towel at the trade deadline a little while ago, and that's that. But they were right there in the mix for a good part of the season as well. So that's my opening rant for today. Let's try to see. I know Gary Bettman's a big fan of the show, and I know Colin Campbell isn't. But if those guys are listening, let's change the playoff format. Let's go back to the old one, or come up with a way that doesn't cheat teams like the Toronto Maple Leafs of all people. I mean, let's be honest here. We want the Toronto Maple Leafs, as in the media here. We want the Toronto Maple Leafs in the playoffs for as long as possible. It's good for the sport. And also, frankly, we want the Boston Bruins in the playoffs as long as possible. That is what's the word I'm looking for? That is a legacy franchise for the National Hockey League. It looks good for the league when they're succeeding. They have a lot of fans. They have fans that are spread up across the country. I think it's a much better look for the league if those two teams meet in the second round or in the conference final, if they manage to get past and avoid the upset in the first round. But what's the upset there, right? First round series, Toronto-Boston. I mean, Toronto wins. Is it really an upset? I just don't like the idea. It makes no sense to me. So we'll see if it changes. Coming up next, it's going to be a pleasure to welcome back to the show for the first time in at least a couple of years, I would think. Corey Masisak has a new gig. You may remember him from gigs covering the Washington Capitals about a decade ago, around the time I was getting into this business. And he has bounced around a little bit. He's recently been with the New York Post, but no, he's got a new job. And we have to have at least one person from The Athletic on the show every week. He's with The Athletic New York. Corey Masisak on the New Jersey Devils is going to be joining us. We'll talk Devils. We'll talk about what he's been up to for the last couple of years. That's coming up next. This is Hockey Primetime here on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com.
a dozen seconds to go on the power play. Finds Nason. Winds the puck around. Maroon on the far side corner. Patrick Maroon under pressure. Tries to work this back and does. Quick shot, they score! Severson shot it. It was deflected in front, and the Devils have a 2-1 lead. Here's Boyle. Maneuvering in, he scores! They've beaten Saros twice in a row.
Yes, Brian Boyle, one of the great stories in the National Hockey League this season. And the New Jersey Devils, how about that? Go into Nashville. How many games have the Preds lost at home this season? Not very many. I know that. I guarantee you the number is low. 7 regulation defeats, 4 overtime or shootout losses. The most recent of which, last night, the Preds knocking on the door of the 100-point plateau this season. They are unbelievable. I guess the only thing you'd wonder about is maybe peaking a little bit too early. But, they're playing some very good hockey, and just up and down that lineup, they got a lot of firepower. And do they have the best blue line in the National Hockey League? They just might. I don't know if maybe Tampa might have something to say about that. But, the Preds are looking good. But how about the New Jersey Devils? Came flying out of the gates this season. And while they are no longer at the top of the division, they're not far off. 5 points out. But perhaps coming down to earth, can we say, a little bit? After that amazing start to the season, the Devils are currently in a wild card spot. So if the playoffs started today, assuming that I understand how the National Hockey League's playoff format works, they would face the Washington Capitals in the first round, and Columbus would get Tampa Bay. Meanwhile, you'd get Pittsburgh, Philly, Boston, Toronto. Now, I've already railed on about this playoff format and why I think it's bad. But either way, the Devils right there close to a playoff spot, and our next guest is going to be there for the stretch run and perhaps into the postseason, assuming that the Devils get there. It's a pleasure to welcome back to the show after, I believe, an absence, a hiatus of at least a couple of years. His name is Corey Masisak, and he's one of the new additions to the Athletic New York City. Corey, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for making time for us here today. Appreciate it. And congratulations on the new gig.
Well, thank you very much. To say that I'm excited would be understating it.
Well, no kidding. And I know that like any person who follows sports in any capacity, I'm sure you'd been enjoying the Athletic before joining the Athletic, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've been, kind of a long-time subscriber / faithful reader for a long time. So, I mean, I obviously have some friends that work there, and some people that I've looked up to for years. Hockey writers, baseball writers, all of it. So it's pretty surreal to just to be on Twitter now and see people that I'm like, oh yeah, I'm like teammates with that guy now or that girl. Like it's pretty incredible.
It's great, and you're right. I mean, I have a couple of friends who are working with the Athletic, and it's been really cool to see. It seemed like almost at the beginning of the season, it was like your favorite writer in every market was all of a sudden working for the Athletic, and then now we're seeing more and more announcements coming, especially in New York over the last little while. So yeah, it is exciting, and I've been enjoying it. I hope maybe you get an even better deal than 35% off your subscription now that you work for the Athletic. But no, I'm just kidding, and that's terrific. So what have you been doing for the last couple of years? You're coming back. You're covering the National Hockey League again. The New Jersey Devils beat for the Athletic New York City. What have you been up to for the last couple of years?
Yeah, for the past 6 or 7 months, I've been working at the New York Post in town here, just on their web desk. And before that, I wrote a lot about college football and some college football recruiting, which is a whole nother world to itself. And that's pretty much been it. I wrote about some hockey stuff right after I left NHL.com for a little while. I was kind of freelancing for the Sporting News while I was living in North Carolina, but now that I'm back in New York City, it's, like I said, I've been learning all about all the different New York teams here at the Post, and now I'm ready to be a hockey writer again. And
for years, and I think when I sort of got into this business, Corey was on the beat covering the Washington Capitals for a long time, and that was the Washington Post, I believe. And anyway, I've written a lot about hockey and quite a background in hockey, so it's not like you're coming into this with no idea what's going on. But it is a very different Devils team, isn't it, than it was even a couple of years ago? This is an exciting team. I've heard them described as the fastest team in the National Hockey League. I mean, this is not the plodding, trapping, boring Devils that we became used to after a couple of decades under Lou Lamoriello.
Right. I mean, they're young and they're fast and they're fun to watch. And they've got a coach that lets them be young and fast and fun to watch, which I think I had some experience with that when I was in D.C. When Bruce Boudreau got to the Capitals. But so, yeah, no, it's been, they kind of came into a season with, very little expectations, at least externally, and now they're here. And I mean, it's been pretty fascinating, even just the past couple games to watch. Like last night was a great example. Like they're playing, maybe the best team in the league or the second best team in the league, and they on the road, and the building was rocking like it's almost April. And the Predators just came out and blew their doors off for a couple of minutes, and it was like, oh, okay, this is, and you could just kind of see as the first period went on, like some of the kids on the Devils were sort of figuring out, like, okay, I'm not going to have as much time to make a decision with this puck as I did whenever I was playing against, some non-playoff team that we played a couple weeks ago. So. They played really well. Gave up some big opportunities, and Keith Kincaid's been a really good story for them in goal, kind of helping out with Corey Schneider being hurt and still sort of finding his way back from injury. But look, if you watched them play last night, I think they went toe to toe with the Predators. UC Saros was great. I mean, they could have scored 4 or 5 goals against him too. It could have easily been a 4-4, 5-5 type of game. So it was definitely it was a fun one to watch for sure. And I think one of my teammates, Dom, wrote a thing the other day that basically laid out, look, they've got the toughest schedule in the league.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not going to be easy.
And they're going to need Corey Schneider, right? I mean, they're right there, and they are sort of nipping at the heels, I guess you could say, 3 points behind Philadelphia. And as we mentioned, the Florida Panthers are knocking on the door with their strong play of late. So they're going to need Corey Schneider sooner rather than later. Do we know when he might be back for them?
Yeah, I mean, he's back. He's played,
okay.
I think 3 or 4 games since he came back from injury, but he's not back to being, quote unquote, all capital letters Corey Schneider necessarily. I mean, I think it's sort of a developing story here where you see this happen, almost every year in about half the markets where the backup goaltender plays pretty well for a stretch, and it's like, well, how much should we play him versus playing our tried and tested number one?
Nothing compared to what's going on in Washington with Braden Holtby these days, and Philip Grubauer getting a shutout yesterday. That's certainly a fascinating story as well. One more for you on the Devils I wanted to get your perspective on is Taylor Hall's 26-game point scoring streak that recently wrapped up. I've seen people try to put it into historical context, and Wayne Gretzky had his 51-game point scoring streak, and we always try to compare stuff and talk about how impressive this is versus how that is. I mean, I think everybody agrees it's pretty amazing what Taylor Hall did. Is it, do you think, does it sort of hold up historically when you think about how much harder it is to score now in the National Hockey League? Do you agree that there's a case to be made to at least compare the accomplishments of Hall to the great point scoring streaks of the past in the league?
I think for sure. I mean, just look at the list. Like you watch every Devils broadcast from the past 10 games or so, and they put up the list, and the list is Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, Sidney Crosby, Taylor Hall. Like, I mean, that's that alone makes it, like the company that he was keeping is incredibly impressive. But you're right. I mean, the era. I mean, I know the goal scoring's up a little bit this year from the past couple of years, but it's still not anywhere near where it was, and it's part of his case for the Hart Trophy is that he doesn't have, when Sidney Crosby had one of his streaks, he had a couple of other world-class players playing with him. And Taylor Hall might have a couple of world-class with him, but they're, 18, 19 years old. So it's a little bit different. It's been fun watching Nico Hischier in the same kind of way, like sort of learn from playing with Taylor Hall. And you see like little glimpses here and there. Like, oh yeah, this guy, he's going to be really good. But yeah, no, I think just that in the length of the streak, the context of it, the team that he's playing with, how he, just like there have been nights where they literally needed him to, carry the offense for them or they weren't going to score. It's been pretty amazing.
And you're right about that. I mean, the guy's involved in over half the goals in some way, shape, or form that they score. And what has he got? Like a 30-something point lead on the second leading point getter on the team. It's remarkable what he's doing there. And it's just certainly is making Peter Chiarelli look bad for that trade that he made. Amazing to think that some of the young players that Chiarelli has traded away over the years, and now, the discussion around the Hall for Larson trade has changed. Now Oilers fans think it was a bad trade after loving it last year. One more thing I wanted to ask you about, Corey, since years ago, I mean, I used to call you and we'd ask you about the Washington Capitals. Here you are back covering the National Hockey League, and going back, it was a decade ago that you were on and I know more recently than that as well, but you were on the Capitals beat. Are you surprised that they still have not won a Stanley Cup with the great teams that they've had?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there have been at least 3 instances, I think, where it was like, okay, this is the year. It's going to happen. I mean, look, there's no consolation prize for being like the third best team in the league. Even regardless of what happens in the regular season, even after the playoffs play out, you say, oh yeah, they were definitely the second or third best team in the league. I mean, basically every year that they've lost to the Penguins in the playoffs, it's been like, oh yeah, they were probably either the second or third best team in the league that year. And look, recently they, could have / should have beaten the Penguins. So, every year you get to the Stanley Cup Finals and you say, well, this might not be the 2 best teams in the league. Actually, this is just the 2 teams that got here. So, I mean, it's been a great run. I mean, I know obviously fans want a cup, but I don't know if you would necessarily trade, like, have one great year and win the cup and then not make the playoffs for 6 or 7 years. I mean, I guess some fans would. I'm sure they would. But to me, like, just the run of excellence that they've had, where they had basically one bad year in the last 12 or 10 or whatever it is, and just constantly being one of the best teams in the league, constantly being one of the most fun teams to watch. Like, all that stuff matters, I think. There's that one number that still says 0.
Yeah, it's true, but they have had a chance to see Alexander Ovechkin score 599 goals, and see Nicholas Backstrom still somehow one of the most underrated players in the National Hockey League, and all kinds of other stuff. And speaking of the Capitals, that's where we're going next. We're going to talk to Brian McNally on the other side. But saying goodbye to Corey Masisak, great to have you back covering hockey. I can't wait to read your work for The Athletic New York, and covering the New Jersey Devils. I appreciate it, and enjoy what's left of your Sunday.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to start in a few days, and I'm looking forward to it. And tell Brian I said hello, and I'm going to see him soon.
All right. Cheers. That's Corey Masisak. We're talking to Brian McNally in Washington, covering DC sports. He's got a new gig. Yes, he's with NHL.com and remains with NHL.com, but he's got a new gig as well, the Sports Capital, another subscription site. We are seeing the sports landscape shift a little bit, aren't we, with the sites and the people and what it is exactly that they're doing and how they're doing it. And I frankly am enjoying it. Although I do sometimes wonder, I'm like, okay, so I'm paying this much for Netflix, I'm paying this much for this, and how many sort of $3, $4, $8, $9, $10 monthly subscriptions can I afford to have going? Why don't I read any of these damn New Yorkers that keep coming in the mail? You know what I mean? Anyway, we're talking to Brian McNally on the other side. We'll find out about his new gig. And when's Alexander Ovechkin going to get that 600th goal? Enough already. This is Hockey Primetime on SiriusXM, NHL Network Radio, and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com.
Oshie in a spin move and a backhander and a save made. What a move by Timo Meier to go spinorama and get the shot in on the backhand. Grubauer, a good save. Puck into the San Jose zone. Short circuits for Washington. Meier ahead to LeBanc. Centers here as Tierney came right down the slot. And from 2 feet, a one-timer that Grubauer
5
in a glove and holds on to. Great save from Grubauer.
Oh, yes, Philip Grubauer with the shutout. Do we have a goaltending controversy in Washington? Braden Holtby. He can't do nothing. He can't do nothing right. This guy, did he run out of gas? I don't know what's happening with him. One of the best goalies in the game for the last significant period of time. But second shutout of the season for Philip Grubauer. He's got a .939 save percentage since October 29th. As the Capitals PR department points out, that is the highest save percentage from that date onwards in the National Hockey League for any goalie with at least 16 appearances. So, yeah, well, the question becomes who's the guy in goal for the Capitals going forward? Could Braden Holtby lose his job? This guy's got more wins. I think he does have more wins than any goalie in the National Hockey League over the last, 3-4 seasons. He just piles them up year after year after year, 40-plus win seasons. But, yeah, a lot of eyes on that, a lot of eyes on Alexander Ovechkin, who remains stuck on 599 goals, unless I miss something. But some things don't change. The Washington Capitals still on top of their division, the Metropolitan Division, after leapfrogging the Pittsburgh Penguins last night with that 2-0 win against the San Jose Sharks. So the Capitals are the story right now, and we are trying to check in with Brian McNally. On the other side, he's with the Sports Capital, which is a new subscription-based site for DC sports. And man, what a plethora, what a smorgasbord you've got in the DC area. If you are a fan of sports, you've got the Nationals, who are a highly competitive team in Major League Baseball. That actually similarly to the Capitals, always seem to fall at the wrong time and disappoint in the playoffs. You do, of course, have the the Washington Wizards are, they're not that good. And then you've got the NFL team that is highly popular there. And then you can't forget that within a very short distance, you have all kinds of other teams that are not necessarily based in D.C., but are still nice and close by. That's right. Everything's great in D.C. In the world of sports, in the world of sports, everything's great in D.C. There is some questions, perhaps, about what might be going on there politically, but this is not a political show, right? This is a hockey show, so we are going to stick with that. Might we have a goaltending controversy in Washington? And is this the year that things might be a little bit different for the Washington Capitals? Because this is the thing, right? You get named as a team or as a player and an athlete in any sport, any of the sports we just named, for example, or beyond, that you get this playoff choker label, right? And guys like me, right? Some clown sitting behind a microphone at home who's never played professional hockey, but does have the gall to come out and say that this team or that team has a reputation for disappointing in the playoffs. Look, facts are facts, right? But remember that Steve Yzerman is the greatest, I think, example of this, because I think Steve Yzerman might have been 30 before he finally won a Stanley Cup. And he was tabbed as the guy who couldn't take the team to the promised land. This is a guy who always chokes in the playoffs and yada, yada, yada. We now remember Steve Yzerman as one of the great captains of the last quarter century in the National Hockey League, and a guy who has enough Stanley Cup rings to, I don't know how to complete that analogy. I wasn't planning on making it. And anyway, he's got a lot of Stanley Cup rings, suffice to say, as you know this about Steve Yzerman. And nobody looks back on Steve Yzerman now and says, oh, Steve Yzerman always came up short in the playoffs. But for the first half of his career, that was basically what his reputation was. So it sticks with you until all of a sudden it doesn't, right? You got to win in order to get rid of that reputation. And as we were just talking about with Corey Masisak, I think the Washington Capitals are deserving of that label. This is a team that wins the division, it seems like year after year after year, has won the President's Trophy on several occasions. And is there a year during the Ovechkin era, for lack of a better name for it, that has piled up more points in the regular season and less wins in the postseason than the Washington Capitals? I doubt it. year after year after year. And unfortunately for Ovechkin, so much of this gets hung on him, which I think is a little bit unfair. This is a guy who's played well in the playoffs, who has good playoff numbers, really. It's just he's gone up and toe-to-toe and came into the league right at the same time as Sidney Crosby. And he faces Sidney Crosby in the playoffs, and it seems like the Capitals lose year after year after year. So there's two sort of ways of looking at this for the Capitals, because this year feels a little bit different, right? Why is it that we have such good teams in one division in the East, and such kind of, they're still good teams, but not as many points for the teams in the Metro? It's like there's a log jam in the middle of the Metro, right? You got Washington, Pittsburgh, Philly, 83, 82,
Brian's
and 81 points. So they're all good, but they've been sort of beating up on each other all year long. So nobody's piling up those 94 or 100-point numbers that you see in divisions like the Atlantic. At least this is my theory, that Tampa and Boston have been able to beat up on weak divisions, and maybe that's why they've got so many more points than the best teams in the Metropolitan Division do. But could this year be different for the Washington Capitals for this very simple reason? It seems like expectations this year are lower than ever before. There's a chance that they don't win the division. I know they're leading it right now, but Pittsburgh could leapfrog them. Heck, Philadelphia could leapfrog them with a little bit of a winning streak. And then all of a sudden, they're not the top-ranked team in their division. They may end up with Pittsburgh in the first round, which nobody wants. But I just feel like, for whatever reason, the Washington Capitals are flying under the radar a little bit more this year than they have in years past. And maybe that helps them. Maybe the weight of expectations is a little less significant on their shoulders this year. With more on that, it is a pleasure to welcome to the show Brian McNally from the Sports Capital and NHL.com. Brian, how you doing?
I'm good. How you guys doing?
We're doing all right. Thanks for making time for us here today. I do appreciate it. What do you make of that? The fact that the Capitals are not the regular season juggernaut that they once were. They've got kind of a mediocre road record, and there they are in the division. I know they're in first, but Pittsburgh's 1 point back. Philly's 2 points back. This doesn't seem like it definitely isn't the President's Trophy contending team. Could that be a good thing in a way?
Well, it'll definitely reduce the pressure on them going into playoffs, because you're totally right. Whether or not they win the Metro, and I mean, your point was a good one there. I'm not sure 102 points isn't enough to win the Metro. I mean, the way things are going. I mean, these teams, Pittsburgh has a couple of games in hand. They play Dallas tonight. If they don't win that, I think they're down to maybe 11 or 12 games. It's going to be tough for these teams to get much above 100. And the Caps, in that respect, are in the same boat. They have a couple of games, at least one game in hand on all those teams. And they play Philly and Pittsburgh down the stretch. But whether or not they win the Metro, I don't think anybody's going to go. They're definitely not going into the playoffs as a team that can do anything other in terms of expectations. People aren't going to expect any more than maybe a first-round win, right? Nobody's going to predict a deep playoff run. Nobody's going to look at those kind of advanced analytics and stats and stuff and look at this team as one that's going to do a whole lot in the postseason. We've seen them kind of crack a little bit the past 2 years when they've gotten to that second round against, obviously a championship caliber team. So I do think it could be good in a way for them to go into this without those same expectations, with a lot more doubters. And a lot more people critical of how they're playing. It's not necessarily a good thing, but I do think it will reduce the pressure on them. So that could be a good thing. I guess the other thing is, though, this is the first time, at least I can think of in recent memory, that there's been question marks in goal for the Capitals. Now, Philip Grubauer gets the shutout last night, but what the heck is going on with Braden Holtby? Is he just out of gas or what? It's a great question. I don't think anybody has a good answer to that. I saw former Caps goalie, former Penguins goalie Brent Johnson was on Twitter, I believe 2 days ago, and he pointed out the workload of Holtby. And I do think that's Brent Johnson's point was, look, you guys have no idea what it takes to get mentally focused to play even a regular season game. And then if we take a look at Braden Holtby's playoff, record, he's been their primary playoff goalie since 2012, since they beat the Bruins in the first round in 2012 and went 7 that year against the Rangers before losing. That's 60 extra games. That's an entire season worth of playoff hockey. I think only three goalies in the entire league Lundqvist, Quick, and I believe Crawford obviously have played more than that during those 6 years. So, and they've ridden Braden hard. I mean, they've played him 60-plus games the last couple of seasons. I think he was up around 65 maybe 2 years ago. At some point, maybe that begins to take a toll. Maybe you start to be a little mentally fatigued because, and certainly the Caps bear some blame for this. They're not as good defensively in front of him, but Philip Grubauer is playing with the same guys. It's not like they've been switching the lineup or changing. Their blue line has basically been the same for much of the year, except for a brief injury to Matt Niskanen. So Philip Grubauer has the best save percentage in the league since, I think, November 1st for anyone who's played at least 20, 22 games. So in that respect, it's the same people in front of him. It can't all just be his teammates. Braden is certainly getting a chance to kind of work that out, but it's fascinating to see where we go. If Grubauer, shut out San Jose yesterday, what if this continues? Like, how long does he stay in net? And do you kind of turn to him as we get closer to the playoffs? That is a fascinating question for the Caps down the stretch.
I guess, and it's nice having having an insurance policy like Grubauer. I remember hearing in the lead up to the expansion draft that was a guy that was likely going to be targeted by the Vegas Golden Knights. And anyway, we all know that that's not what happened. And now here he is. He's shutting out the San Jose Sharks last night. And it's a nice luxury to have. We saw it with Pittsburgh last year, right? Matt Murray was not good to go at the beginning of the playoffs, and they had Marc-Andre Fleury. Fleury, who's, of course, in Vegas to bring things sort of full circle. But
full circle. Yeah.
But it's a nice thing to have that a lot of teams don't have, which is a backup goalie who can sort of give you. And I mentioned the number that the Caps PR department threw out there, that he's got a .939 save percentage since late October. I mean, that's, those are Hart Trophy numbers. Amazing. Without a number one workload. So it's a nice thing. But I guess another glass half full way of looking at this Capitals thing and the situation with Holtby is it's like if a guy gets hurt, let's say, this time of the year, a shoulder injury, for example. If he gets 2-3 weeks off at this time of the year and you are able to hang on to your playoff spot, you could potentially have that player back and a lot fresher for the playoffs. The question is, can Holtby sort of turn that around? But that's the dream, isn't it? That whatever is going on with him, it's better that it's going on now than have it going on in late April.
100%. I mean, you lose a playoff series if this happens in mid to late April. Your season implodes. So to give your goalie a chance to refresh, a chance to to get his game back together, maybe that is a good thing. But at a certain point, also you can have your job stolen that way. And I don't necessarily mean long term, but Philip Grubauer just shut out the Sharks. Played well in LA for the most part. They gave up an empty net goal, so he really just gave up two goals on the road against LA. Probably is going to play against the Jets tomorrow night. The Caps have flown back across the country to start to get a game at home against them, and then maybe Holtby gets back in the net later this week when they have a back-to-back with the Islanders, and then play the Flyers on a Sunday. So a chance there, I guess, if Holtby comes out, whichever Islanders game he gets and plays well, maybe Barry Trotz turns back to him for the Flyers game. Obviously an important Metro Division game. That decision will kind of tell you a lot about where the Caps are with their goaltending. If Grubauer beats the Jets tomorrow and they just are like he's playing too well for us to bench him, this may be an extended break for Braden Holtby. If not, and if they can get him 2 games next weekend, then maybe you look at it as this was just a brief refresher. And, the Caps are going to ride Holtby again going forward. But there's not much time left here. So if Grubauer continues to get the net and we get closer to mid-April, then you start asking yourself, who's the guy going forward? It's a fascinating question for the Caps.
And as a sports talk radio host, I can tell you I love goaltending controversies. One of my favorite things. Hey, before I let you go, Brian, tell me a little bit about what you got going on. It's the Sports Capital, CAPITOL, as in the capital, sportscapital.com, or I should say thesportscapital.com, covering sports in the D.C. area, the Capitals, the Nationals, the NFL team, and the Wizards. Can you tell me a little bit more and why D.C. sports fans should subscribe?
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of decided that the time was the niche was there for for a kind of pay DC sports site where people can get a little bit different twist on the coverage. We have continuous podcasts, unique features, and all kinds of stuff on the four major sports teams in DC. Good hockey coverage, good baseball coverage, lots of Skins talk. Obviously, that's the number one game in town, almost always, and Wizards as well. And so we kind of, as a group, figured that the time was right to try to offer people maybe a little different twist on the coverage, and hope we can build up a readership. So far, it's been great support. We're off to a good start, and we hope to kind of continue that here in the next couple of weeks as the Caps and Wizards both look toward the postseason and maybe have a deep playoff run in them. We'll see. It hasn't happened here in a long time, and I think DC sports fans are kind of getting tired of that, the playoff losing. But certainly we've covered all the teams in town over the years, and bring good experience to those beats.
All right. Well, congrats on the new gig. All the best, and thanks for making time for us here today.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
That's Brian McNally, NHL.com, and the news site, The Sports Capital. And as we mentioned, there's a lot of reason to be excited if you're a fan of sports in the DC area. I mean, how fun must it be? I'm here in Montreal. All we got is the NHL. I mean, honestly, the CFL doesn't do it for me. And what else we got? MLS. So it's nice when you have, and I mean, they've got an MLS team in DC too, but the big four, the teams we talked about, I think the interesting thing that they have in common, and something we just heard Brian refer to, is the fact that they've all sort of been disappointing teams in the postseason year after year after year, especially in recent memory. So which of them is going to get out of this rut? Will it be the Caps or the Wizards? And the Wizards, I mean, the Wizards, can they beat Toronto? Can they beat Boston? Can they beat Cleveland in the Eastern Conference? I'm not convinced. The Caps, though, I don't know. There's something there. There's something about this Caps team where I'm thinking maybe if they can avoid Pittsburgh, this is the dream scenario. They don't get Pittsburgh, or Philly somehow gets Pittsburgh and then knocks off Pittsburgh in the first round. That's the dream, right? Because, man, if the Capitals get the Penguins, I am not taking the Capitals. I'm not picking the Capitals to win that series, especially after what happened last year. I thought they had them, and they did. They had them on the ropes, and the Penguins came back and won that series. If they are ever going to overcome the, I think, what's the word for, their nemesis or whatever it is, I don't know if they're ever going to be able to beat Sidney Crosby and the Penguins. They may just need someone else to do that for them. Should we keep saying Sidney Crosby and the Penguins the way things are going for Evgeny Malkin? I'm not sure. He's been great. And what a race we have for the Hart Trophy in the National Hockey League this year. You could probably make a case for 10 different guys to win the Hart Trophy this season. And I think that's a good thing for the game. It really does sort of speak to the amount of star quality you have around the National Hockey League right now. And a lot of these guys are young. Why isn't anybody talking about Ovechkin as a candidate for the Hart Trophy? Now, we'll see, and he will get there soon. But Alex Ovechkin, despite the fact that I may disagree with his political takes, I mean, a big fan of Vladimir Putin, for example, who's not necessarily my favorite person in the world. I probably shouldn't say that out loud. I don't want to end up dead on a park bench somewhere. But no, anyway, Alex Ovechkin.
2 minutes.
599 career goals, and so he's about to get to 600. I don't know if we give this guy the credit he deserves. I saw a quote the other day. It was from Nazem Kadri of the Toronto Maple Leafs, who said, for all the attention that Alex Ovechkin gets, he didn't feel that Ovechkin gets enough credit for what he does. He just scores goals every year. What does it happen? I think he's in his 12th season. And he's had 2 seasons in which he did not score at least 40 goals. He's back at 40 this year. He's knocking on the door of 600. And the rate that he's going, I don't see why we would think that he does not someday reach the lofty sort of Brett Hull-esque heights. Could he be the 3rd player in the history of the game ever to get to 800 goals? Unless I'm mistaken, just Gordie Howe and Wayne Gretzky have ever scaled those lofty heights. If Ovechkin does that in the sort of post-lockout era in the National Hockey League, I think we would have to think and have to say, I know people love Wayne Gretzky, and they do with good reason. I mean, he is arguably the greatest player of all time. Alex Ovechkin, I think, is the greatest goal scorer of all time. You adjust to what he's doing for the era that he's doing it in. It's amazing. Although the other guy who's got 40 goals this season, and Patrick Laine, may be even better than Alex Ovechkin. We'll see. Coming up next, it's hour number 2 of the show. We are going to chat with George Richards about the Columbus Blue Jackets. We'll talk to Matt DeFranks about the Florida Panthers, and we'll go around the league with Sean Leahy. So a busy hour ahead. It's your Sunday Daylight Savings Time edition of Hockey Primetime here on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio, and streaming live, as always, at hockeyprimetime.com.
2-minute break here, guys. You guys all set?
Atkinson with another chance, and not only does he get it out, but he gets it to Panarin, who's all by himself. He's in, passes across to Jones, and he shoots and scores! And Jones and for a goal!
No, George, I'll let you know when he's on the line.
Applicator with the pass, it got broken up, and here comes Boone Jenner. On the counterattack, puts it on the right side to Bannock, back to Jenner, same made, follow chance, and a score! Seth Jones with his second of the game, and the Blue Jackets lead 3-1. Oh, put a little mustard on mine, Captain Brady.
Ah, yes, the cannon was going off at Nationwide. Seth Jones with a couple of goals. The Blue Jackets beat the Red Wings. What a player, what a season Seth Jones is having. And, wow, imagine. I mean, you think about this, and we talk about this always, what if? Think about guys that are traded. And Jones, look, I mean, Ryan Johansson's a good player, although kind of quietly having a fairly disappointing season from a statistical standpoint. But Seth Jones, I mean, imagine if Nashville still had Seth Jones. Who knows? Anyway, I mean, we'd be branching off into a alternate reality where all kinds of things would be very different. But Nashville, as good as that blue line is, I mean, imagine having a blue line that's called right now, and I think is the best blue line in the National Hockey League, which is what they have there in Nashville, and knowing that they traded away a guy like Seth Jones, who is quietly, and maybe it is a little bit of the market that he plays in, but one of my favorite players, and he and Zach Werenski, that's certainly one of the best pairings in the National Hockey League. But you have a Blue Jackets team that right now is fighting for their lives. You've got a very, very tight race, which we've referred to a couple of times. And I apologize to our listeners on the West Coast, because I know we've been a little bit zoned in on the Eastern time zones and the teams in the East, at least so far this week. And we will try to make time for the West. But yeah, this Eastern playoff race is something right now. You've got the Florida Panthers, who are a great story. They're winning hockey games. And they're right there knocking on the door of the final wild card spot, which is currently held by the Columbus Blue Jackets. Thanks most recently to Seth Jones and the guys for delivering a 3-2 win over the Detroit Red Wings yesterday. So they're 2 points up on Florida. Columbus is for that last spot. They're 1 point behind Jersey. Now, both Jersey and Columbus have played 69 games this season. And Florida's played only 66.
On the line.
So Florida has 3 games in hand and is just 2 points behind the Blue Jackets. So the Panthers have won 2 in a row. The Jackets have won 4 in a row. And we do have ourselves a race. Strangely or interestingly, and perhaps this is interesting only to me, the guy who we are talking to next spent years covering the Florida Panthers and is now covering the Columbus Blue Jackets for the Columbus Dispatch. His name is George Richards, and he rejoins the show right now to talk a little bit about this exciting race and the fact that he has, well, covered both teams that are nipping at that final playoff spot. George, welcome back to the show.
Good afternoon, Connor. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing all right, and thanks for making time for us here today on this Sunday. I do appreciate it. Sundays, normally normally Sundays for me are truly a day of rest. So I appreciate the fact that you are making time for me on your Sunday. And the Panthers are a great story right now. And I know that, as we just mentioned, you spent years covering that team. And right there, chasing the Columbus Blue Jackets. We just broke down sort of the playoff race here. But the Jackets seem to have their swagger back with 4 wins in a row, don't they?
Yeah, that's what John Tortorella hopes anyway. I mean, he's brought up that actual word, swagger, a few times over the past couple of weeks. He says they've got it, then they lose it, and then they've got it back. But I think they've been playing definitely well of late. Have been playing well, really. Since the trade deadline. I mean, you take away those 2 games in California where they seem to lose that confidence that they had, and then they just kind of got blitzed by the Kings and the Ducks, and they've been playing pretty well. They beat Washington. They came back. They beat the Sharks. They've beaten Vegas, and now they held on and they beat Detroit the other night. So this is a team that knows you can't slip up. Florida is right on their heels. New Jersey just, they overtook New Jersey for a day, and then the Devils got a great win last night in Nashville. So I think, as tough as this upcoming road trip is for New Jersey, it got off to a great start for them. And it's going to be crazy because I think when you talk about those 3 games that Florida has in hand, I don't know if anybody's playing as well as the Panthers are right now. I think they've won 8 or 9 of their last 10. It looks like the Panthers finally put things together. And I was talking to somebody the other day. This was probably a playoff team last year in Florida. Had all the stuff that went on there not happened, and the time the wheels just kind of fell off at the end of the year. But that was a team at the trade deadline that was right there, and I think maybe even had a playoff spot for a little bit in there when they had that 5-game winning streak. So Florida's not a bad team. Obviously playing well right now, and so's Columbus. So it is a race. And for a while, a couple weeks ago, nobody wanted that last playoff spot. Now you've got a real fight for it.
And they will meet these 2 teams, the Jackets and the Panthers. So we're going to have to wait a little while until it happens, but they will be playing it nationwide. At that point, there's going to be 7 games remaining for the Blue Jackets and 10 games remaining for the Panthers. So this games in hand story will continue to be one for the foreseeable future. But yeah, the Columbus Blue Jackets right now are in a playoff spot. That's the thing about the games in hand. You do have to win them after all. So we talked about having their swagger back. What happened when they seemed to sort of lose their way a couple of weeks ago?
Well, I think it's just been an ongoing problem with Columbus. I think they were one of the top teams in the league in the first 2 months of the year, and then they had, they started to struggle. Then they had a bunch of injuries, and they, were just trying to keep their head above water, and they did that. They treaded water, and they were doing okay, and they just never were able to get back where they were in October and November, and it looks like they always kind of believed that they could do it. I don't know if the word believe is right, because I think they just were going off what they had done before. I think there was a little bit of self-doubt there, but they kept pointing at, well, we've done it before. And I think now that once they started tasting a little success, they've won 4 in a row. It's the first time they've had any sustained winning streak since November. I think they're starting to feel it in the room for real. And you look at the special team numbers; they're going to be bad. They're not going to be very good at the end of the year. John Tortorella has stressed that. He's like, we can't worry about what our penalty kill looks like. We can't worry about what our final power play numbers look like. But as long as we are successful moving forward, we'll be okay. And I think that has been the case. The penalty kill has been much improved. They're getting some goals on the power play. They're getting, the usual good goaltending, from both Bob and Korpisalo, who had to step in for a couple games and got 2 wins for him. So right now, everything's going good. You look at the trade deadline, they added Ian Cole. They kept Jack Johnson. They're pretty stacked defensively. About their top 2 defensemen in Werenski and Seth Jones. So, from the goalie out, this is a very solid hockey team. They still struggle to score goals, but, they seem to find them when they need them. And right now, they're playing pretty well. And in the schedule, you talked earlier in the show about how tough New Jersey's schedule is down the road. That's not the case in Columbus. I mean, as long as they take care of business, I think they're going to be okay.
And interesting, too, that they do have a great rookie on their roster in Pierre-Luc Dubois, but in a season where Matthew Barzal is sort of stealing all the headlines, and even Brock Besser is getting a lot of love out there in Vancouver, Charlie McAvoy in a market like Boston and doing what he's doing as a 19-year-old that gets a lot of attention as well. But Pierre-Luc Dubois is not yet 20. He's 19 years old, the pride of Saint-Agathe-des-Monts here in Quebec, about an hour and 15 minutes north of Montreal, and grew up in Rimouski, Quebec, which is a little bit further from Montreal, where the St. Lawrence River gets a little bit wider. But Dubois is having a really solid rookie campaign, isn't he?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is a guy that in training camp, they weren't sure, if he was going to make the team. He looked like one of the guys that was going to be on the team, but what role was he going to play? 3rd, 4th role, probably fourth line. And he's been for the past couple months their top line center. Like you said, I covered the Florida Panthers for a long time, and I kind of compare it to maybe an Alexander Barkov situation where we seem to be, other than people inside hockey, the people in Florida were the only ones who really seemed to know how good Sasha Barkov was. And now he's, kind of picked that up. And I think people around the country and around the NHL are really noticing how good he is. And I think same kind of thing with Dubois. His numbers aren't going to stack up against some of those other guys that are Rookie of the Year candidates. But that doesn't, negate the good things that he has done this year. He has stepped into a top role. He's playing with Panarin and Cam Atkinson right now. And like Tort said the other day, whatever the Jackets have thrown at him, whatever situation they've put him in, he has been successful at it. They don't look at him as a rookie anymore. He's been playing too much and he's been playing too well. People forget how young he is because of the way he's played. So no, he's not gonna challenge for the Rookie of the Year, but I think the Jackets are extremely happy with the way he's progressed and the way he has played this year.
We're chatting with George Richards, who's with the Columbus Dispatch on the beat covering the Columbus Blue Jackets. The Blue Jackets right now are 5th in the Metropolitan Division and hold the final wildcard spot in the Stanley Cup playoff race in the Eastern Conference. Still got a ways to go. And yes, the Seth Jones story is the other one. We played the highlights on the way in. A couple of huge goals that he put up there yesterday, and him and Zach Werenski make up what might be the best defensive pairing in hockey. He's got 46 points in 69 games, so he's not putting up like Brent Burns, PK Subban,
Right.
Erik Karlsson video game numbers, but he's having a hell of a season too. Why aren't we hearing any Norris buzz for him?
Well, and I think they're kind of pushing that. And again, I think he's still very young, and I think those kind of things kind of grow as players continue that. I think those are the kind of awards that guys get after years and years of doing it. I think once you start them getting in the conversation, you don't just jump into the conversation and win it. I think you've got to continue it, and that's something that Seth Jones, I think, we all know his skill set. He was the number 1 rated guy going into his draft. People know who Seth Jones is. People know who Zach Werenski is. People have been following him. But he is just maturing into a terrific NHL defenseman. He'll be in that conversation, I think, for the next couple of years. And I don't know if he'll ever win it or not, but he's going to be in there. And I think that if he continues to go down the road he's going, and there's no reason to believe that he won't, Seth Jones has become an elite NHL defenseman and the linchpin for this Columbus Blue Jackets franchise.
Well, and it is. It's going to be fun, and I hope you have playoff games to cover. John Tortorella's at Columbus Blue Jackets trying to hang on down the stretch here. Do you think, George, are they good enough up the middle? And we talked about Dubois, but he is 19 years old. If I'm looking for a weakness, I don't know, Dubois, Foligno, Benberg, and Letestu as your 4 centers, at least as it stands right now. Is that good enough, especially in a division with so many great guys up the middle?
Yeah, it's definitely been a problem, and I think it's something that they've kind of been mixing and matching. And you talk about Dubois, he was put on that first line almost out of a necessity. Just let's see how this. We have nobody else that's really shown. Let's see what the kid can do, and he took that opportunity and ran with it. That should be Alexander Wenberg's spot. You would think that Wenberg is the number 1 center here, but that's not the case because he just hasn't produced, and other guys have. So, yeah, I mean, especially when you look at a team like Florida that's so strong up the middle, as strong as the Blue Jackets are defensively, yeah, that's a weakness up the middle, but I think they've been getting decent play of late. Foligno's back at center. He's only played there the last couple games. He started, in training camp at center. They moved him over from wing because they knew that they had a lack of depth at that position. Letestu comes in at the trade deadline. I think that was a terrific move. Being able to put him in that 4th line role and not worry about the 4th line anymore. Now, Torts is tinkering with it here and there, but not like he was before when he was really only going with 3 lines in most games because he didn't trust the 4th line. Now he's got his 4th line going that he has some faith in that he can play. So that really helps them. I think they're getting decent play from the 4 lines now, as opposed to earlier in the year where it was just you had the one line and maybe you had one other line that would get something going. But it's definitely something that they've been concerned with all year, and this dates all the way back to training camp.
George, thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy what's left of this lovely Sunday.
I'm going to. Thanks a bunch. We'll see you.
Cheers. That's George Richards of the Columbus Dispatch on the Columbus Blue Jackets beat. I did say lovely. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the weather's like in Columbus. I don't even know if that's where George actually is. I do know that the sun is shining here in Montreal into the beautiful state-of-the-art Hockey Primetime studio where we record the show. Well, we bring you the show live, actually. We don't record it, although we do record it for podcasting purposes, but the show is live, I can assure you right now. Unless you're listening to us on the podcast page at hockeyprimetime.com, in which case it's podcasted. But as I say these words, I swear to you, we are coming to you live on Sunday. It is 4:18 p.m. Eastern. Did you remember to set your clocks back last night? Huh? Do you still have to do that? I mean, it's your microwave and your stove, right? Your phone does it automatically at this point. Perhaps you're one of the people that still wears a watch, which is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with wearing a watch. Laura, do you wear a watch? No, Laura doesn't wear a watch. I don't wear a watch. That's what my phone's for. Coming up next, we're talking to Matthew DeFranks. He's on the Florida from the I should say the South Florida Sun Sentinel, and covering one of the hottest teams in the National Hockey League. The Florida Panthers are on fire, and Alexander Barkov is getting some love in the Hart Trophy race. It's been a lot of fun lately in the National Hockey League, hasn't it? So coming up next, we're talking Panthers and whether they can keep this up down the stretch with Matthew DeFranks. This is Hockey Primetime on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com.
And the Rangers will recover. This one's cleared out to center. The Panthers bring it back in a hurry. Vetrano out in front. Trocheck, far circle. Hoover out to Trocheck again. Back in front. They score! Trocheck to Vetrano right out in front. His first game as a Panther, and he's got his first goal as a Panther. It's 2-0.
Hey, welcome back. It's Hockey Primetime. I'm Conor McKenna. Yeah, that was the Florida Panthers getting a goal. Frank Vetrano. How about Vincent Trocheck? I saw Ray Ferraro, the excellent Ray Ferraro, one of my favorite analysts. I'd say the best at what he does. Best guy I'd most like to hear on a broadcast. My dream broadcast is Chris Cuthbert and Ray Ferraro, and we're lucky enough to get to hear those guys together sometimes, both in this country and on the NBC coverage of the National Hockey League. But I love Ray Ferraro. So great as a radio guest, too. If you ever have a chance to hear him on, he does an appearance here in Montreal on TSN Radio's Melnick in the Afternoon. That is always must-listen radio. Just very, very strong takes, very well-reasoned, and no BS from Ray Ferraro, which I certainly appreciate. Just agenda-free analysis. You know what I mean? So many guys in the game, they've got friends. Oh, they're friends with this guy. They got to protect this relationship. Oh, maybe they're angling for a general manager's job somewhere down the road. They don't want to say the wrong thing and hurt somebody's feelings. You never get that kind of thing with Ray Ferraro. And anyway, Ferraro recently on Twitter singled out Vincent Trocheck as one of the most underrated, underappreciated players in the National Hockey League today. And, well, how good is this guy? I think if the Panthers are going up the middle, Barkov, Trocheck, they're probably in pretty good shape for the next decade or so. The answer to a question that I think a lot of teams have here in Montreal, they haven't had a number 2 center, let alone a number 1 center for the last decade or so. And in Columbus, we were just talking to George Richards, the team that the Panthers are chasing. You look at that team up the middle, they're not that good. And maybe Pierre-Luc Dubois is going to be there someday, but 19 years old. Very nice to have Trocheck, a 25-plus goal scorer, likely will be a 30-goal scorer this year, and had a really strong season 2 years ago as well, but sort of maybe like the Panthers last year, just not as good. And Alexander Barkov is getting love in the Hart Trophy race from people in the national media. So it's a nice time to be a Florida Panthers fan. They keep winning games. They're very much in the mix, and they've got those games in hand over the teams that they are chasing. With more on the Florida Panthers story, a pleasure to welcome to the show from the South Florida Sun Sentinel, covering the Florida Panthers, Matthew DeFranks. Welcome.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thanks for making time for us here today. We do appreciate it. Let's start with Trocheck, who maybe doesn't get a lot of love, but is playing some really good hockey for them. Is this a guy who you feel sort of really coming into his own these days?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird to think about him as sort of a second fiddle on this team because of Alexander Barkov, but he's having a career year as well. I mean, I think last night or this weekend this homestand, excuse me, he's up to 26 goals, I believe. So, yeah, he's having a great year for the Panthers, and him and Barkov have really been a great 1-2 punch. And the thing with Trocheck is that he can do so many things, and he's such a leader in the dressing room as well. He's on the power play. He has a ton of power play points this year. He's on the penalty kill. He just scored a shorthanded goal the other day, and he is a respected vocal leader inside the dressing room. He wears that A on his chest. So there's so many things that Vincent Trocheck can do, and the Panthers have him signed long term. Sometimes it's weird to remember him as an elite player in the league when there is a number 1 center above him named Alexander Barkov.
Mm-hmm. And there was a rumor. Now, I don't know how true this was, but I remember around deadline time here in Montreal, there was a lot of talk about Max Pacioretty and him potentially being on the move. And one of the words was that Marc Bergevin and maybe the Panthers asked about Pacioretty, and he said, "Oh, sure, yeah, you can have Pacioretty. We want Vincent Trocheck." And Dale Talon then ended the phone call. This is a guy who's 24 years old. He's, as you point out, got 26 goals. He's got 62 points in 66 games, so very nearly a point-a-game player in the National Hockey League this year, and he's played in every game and is being used in all situations, as you point out. So, yeah, they've got a good one there in Trocheck, and an answer to a question that a lot of teams have is that kind of depth up the middle. Why have the Panthers been so much better in the second half of the season than they were in the first half? Individual performances, it just seems like everything sort of came together in the second half of the calendar for the Panthers.
Yeah, I think there's so many different reasons. It's not just one thing. And it's been kind of different reasons at different points of the second half, honestly. Number one, I think, is their power play. They're at about 30% since the All-Star break. Best power play in the league since then. Probably not sustainable, but they're getting a lot off that man advantage there. So that obviously helps. During this streak in the second half, they've had 3 different goaltenders pick up wins. Hari Satari earlier, and then James Reimer. Then since Roberto Luongo came back from a groin injury, he has been incredible. I think he's at .933 in the 9 or 10 games that he's played since coming back from that injury. So you have those 2 things. You have them taking care of business against bad teams. You look at their schedule coming up, and they just played Montreal. They just played the Rangers. They have Ottawa 3 more times. Edmonton comes into town. Arizona comes into town. They have all these bad teams, and you look at the bottom of the Atlantic Division that they're playing. And I looked this up today. They haven't lost to a team behind them in the current rankings since January 5. So they've gone 2 months without losing to a team below them in the standing. And when you have the schedule they have coming up, that's going to be very beneficial. So kind of those 3 things. And plus, they're playing Bob Budner's systems the way that he wants them to. He wants to play fast, get up and down, get north-south, but not get into a track meet. And they've really produced off the rush. I wrote a little bit about this yesterday. They have 27 of their 66 goals in the second half off the rush. So they're really getting out in transition, and they're really pushing the pace in that way. And so I think there's a bunch of different factors that have gone into this win streak, and it's been really fun to watch them.
And look, a lot of production from guys that are young, right? Dadonov is like a grizzled veteran on this team, but he's 29 years old. Barkov's 22, Bjugstad's 25, Huberto's 24, Trocheck's 24, Vetrano's 24. They've got McCann is not yet 22 years old. Up and down the lineup, I mean, this is a team that, as much as the present looks pretty good, they also look pretty well set for the foreseeable future, don't they?
Yeah, this is kind of bringing me back to the trade deadline a little bit. I was looking at it at the roster a few weeks before it, and they don't really have any UFAs. Radim Vrbata is the only UFA they have, and he's 36, and he said he plans on retiring anyway. So everyone else is under club control or is an RFA this offseason. So they have a lot going forward, and that's part of the reason why Dale Talon stood pat at the trade deadline. I think we saw him try to make some deals, but they weren't willing to part with their young guys. You mentioned Trocheck and the other prospects they have, like Henrik Borgstrom, who's playing really well in Denver right now in college. And then plus they didn't want to give a first-round pick. So they have all of this for the future ready to go as soon as next year, even with Borgstrom and maybe Owen Tippett joining the team. It's funny, I was actually looking at their forward group that could be in the lead next year, and there is so much speed. I mean, you looked at the way they're playing now, and then you add a guy like Owen Tippett, and you add Henrik Borgstrom, and you have Frank Vetrano playing, more experience in the system, and they have a lot of young, speedy, skilled guys, and it's crazy to think that earlier this year, forward depth was a huge issue because they're trying to find wingers for Vincent Trocheck. And now it kind of is coming into focus that they have some guys that can fill some roles for a few years to come as well.
It sounds like this kid Borgstrom's going to be a hell of a player if things play out like that. And yeah, you mentioned Tippett. I mean, that's a 10th overall draft pick from last year as well. So those would be some pretty nice reinforcements if that happens. And you could be talking about a team that goes up the middle eventually with Borgstrom, Barkov, and then to Trocheck, and then to Borgstrom. That's not too shabby as far as a 1, 2, 3. I'm curious though too that I know it's different. Like the stakes maybe are different. And Dale Talon is a widely respected hockey man, and clearly deserves credit for all of the nice things that we've been saying about him in the last little while. But there is other stuff too, right? Like I know that he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, essentially said defense wins championships, to defend the decision to let not only Jonathan Marchessault, but also Riley Smith slip through their fingers and no longer be with this team. And we're talking about forward depth as a strength of this team. But I mean, imagine what might have been if they still had those guys who have been so good for the Vegas Golden Knights this year. I think about Dale Talon, and I wonder what your perspective is on this as a general manager. And I have this sort of mixed bag of feelings. He was the architect of the Chicago Blackhawks' first Stanley Cup, but he's also the guy who got fired for forgetting to get the faxes through on time on all those qualifying offers with those guys. He's the guy who gave that contract to Dave Boland. Just as a couple of examples off the top of my head, I don't know. How do you sort of reconcile that when it comes to Dale Talon and the good and the bad?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it right there. I mean, there is good and bad, and I think with any general manager, there is going to be good and bad. I think part of it was some of those deals that were signed last year weren't under his control. So you look at the deal that Riley Smith had, 5 years, $5 million each, probably a little bit overpriced for what Riley Smith was giving you, and he still had an extra year on his contract left. So I'm not sure that the timing of it worked out, the money of it worked out. And so obviously he is producing in Vegas, and you could very well make the argument that he's living up to his contract now. But I think Talon saw an opportunity to kind of get that off the books and put Marchessault in there. And I mean, Marchessault's in the last year of his contract this year. Obviously, he signed an extension now, but there is going to be a mixed bag. Obviously the Dave Bolin deal was not great, and Arizona is still paying him, right? So there is a mixed bag, and you look at even his offseason moves last year. There's not a whole lot to be kind of positive about outside of Evgeny Dadonov. Evgeny Dadonov has really been great since coming up from the KHL. Hari Star, the third-string goalie, has filled in nicely, kind of what you asked for from a third-string goalie. But, Radim Vrbata has given him almost nothing. Henrik Haapala, he was supposed to be kind of someone from Finland that could come in and be a skilled guy in the top six, and he is finishing up the year in Finland because he spent so much time in the AHL and he was hurt and didn't produce. So he didn't really work out. Jamie McGinn, they traded for him in the preseason. They traded Jason Demers to Arizona. So he was adding forward depth, and he's brought some grittiness, some dirty, maybe not dirtiness, that's the wrong word, grittiness in the dirty areas, I should say, in front of the crease. He's brought some of that. And, so it's been kind of a mixed bag in the offseason. And but you look at long-term with the drafting of Barkov and Huberdeau and Aaron Ekblad and guys like that, there's always going to be hit and miss, I think.
And finally, and I know you've been seeing this guy for years. I love Alexander Barkov, and it was really 2 years ago where I saw him at the Bell Center and was just amazed by this player. And now, well, we're seeing him. He's getting some love. We're hearing national writers, national media members putting him in the Hart Trophy conversation, putting him in the Selke conversation as well. Has that been nice to see? And how impressed have you been with just how good Alexander Barkov has been this year?
Yeah, I think that the toughest thing with him is that you don't fully appreciate his game until you see him in person or really focus on him on TV, because his game is truly 200 feet. Like we talked about with Trocheck, he does play all situations. He's the net front guy on the power play. He's the second unit on the PK. He's one of the best shootout guys in the league, if not the best guy in the league in the shootout. I think he's at 54% in the face-off circle. He just does so many things that even if he doesn't get on the score sheet, he can still control the game from that perspective. And you look at who Bob Boudler has given him to play with, and him and Evgeny Dadonov have had great chemistry this season. And him and Nick Butstead on his other wing have really developed something and kind of made each other better, filled in some missing parts of each other's games. And so, the thing with Barkov is you look at him for postseason awards, and I think around the All-Star break, I was kind of thinking, all right, he's looking like a Selke candidate. He's always been kind of, he'll be there someday. He'll be there next year, the year after. And this year it seems like he's arrived. And with Bergeron out for a little bit, who knows what happens with that vote? But there is at least some sort of opening for him there. And if the Panthers make the playoffs, which it looking increasingly likely that they will, he's probably going to, like you said, get some consideration for the Hart, since it is such a wide open race for the Hart as well. So there's just so much to his game, and he seems to really be coming into his own and feeling confident about his game, where he's at, and feeling like he belongs really in the top tier of every player in the NHL.
Well, yeah, he is definitely fun to watch. They got a franchise center. Heck, they might have 2 or if not 3 franchise centers there in Florida. Must be nice, says the Canadiens fans here in Montreal, who don't even have one of those guys. Hey, Matthew, a pleasure to chat with you, man. I appreciate it, and we'll have fun watching this stretch run.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Cheers. That's Matthew DeFranks of the South Florida Sun-Sentinel on the Florida Panthers. The Panthers are nipping at the heels of the Columbus Blue Jackets. Coming up next, this playoff format in the National Hockey League. You may have heard me ranting and raving about this off the top of the show. Why would Toronto start the playoffs on the road against Boston if they have the 3rd best record in the conference? Because of this stupid playoff format. Let's find out what Sean Leahy thinks about that and all the storylines around the National Hockey League. Our friend from Pro Hockey Talk, Sean Leahy, is next here on Hockey Primetime.
You can go about 13 minutes in the next segment and still have 2 to wrap up in the final segment.
Thank you.
No problem. Sean's on the line, by the way.
Looks to Pasternak at the attacking line, and Anthony Duclair is down holding his right knee. I did not see this.
Yeah, it's contact away from the play between Duclair and Marchand. As his play turns the opposite direction, wow. Marchand tries to avoid him, kind of elevates up off the ice, but now his gloves and his stick are up high, but it looks like the injury's to the lower part of his body.
Yeah, he just caught an edge.
Knee. You can see that right leg.
Jeez.
What was that exactly? Like a flying clothesline? I've seen a lot of Blackhawks players' sticks go flying into the air in the last 24 hours or so. It was the, or maybe not 24 hours, but yeah, Brad Marchand on Anthony Duclair. Duclair's stick goes flying. Earlier today, we saw Zdeno Chara high stick. Brandon saw that dude almost threw his stick into the stands. It went so far. And Brad Marchand, very convenient. He suffered an upper body injury and would not play in the second game of the home-and-home between the Blackhawks and the Bruins today. So he doesn't have to worry about any retribution from Chicago. And round we go. Is something going to happen to Brad Marchand? Well, I don't know. Maybe our next guest does. It is a pleasure to welcome back to the show from Pro Hockey Talk, Sean Leahy is on the line. Hello, Sean.
Hey, Connor, how are you?
I'm doing all right. And well, what do you think? How would you describe Brad Marchand on Anthony Duclair? That was a new one, even by Brad Marchand standards.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the more awkward collisions I've seen between two hockey players. Marchand, he makes that turn. He sees Duclair is in his sights, but it's almost like he waited for Duclair to make that first move to get out of the way, and then when realized that wasn't going to happen, he went 80s WWF style with like the running clothesline, and obviously Duclair fell back on that leg, and now he's going to miss maybe up to 2 weeks, which is unfortunate, but. And of course, because it's Brad Marchand, you're going to get the upper of, should he be suspended, and especially because there's an injury as well. And, when you're Brad Marchand, you're never going to get the benefit of the doubt there in a situation like that.
Do you think it deserves supplementary discipline?
I watched it several more times this morning, and I don't think so. Like I said, I think it's just one of those awkward. If you take away the nameplates off the backs of the jersey, of the jersey, and the guy wearing black and yellow, I think it's just an awkward collision involving a guy who obviously has a very storied history with the Department of Player Safety.
6 suspensions in his career, most recently for that crazy flying elbow on Marcus Johansson of the New Jersey Devils, and he was banned for 5 games for that. Meanwhile, Johansson still hasn't come back from that, which was a fairly ugly incident. I think that's the thing. It's hard to sort of look at something that Brad Marchand does without at least thinking about some of the other stuff he's done, and the fact is, it is hard to give him the benefit of the doubt. But on the other hand, I don't know. And even with the Johansson one, and people got mad at me for saying this, but I was like, I mean, it seems crazy, and you slow it down, and it looks really bad. And because it's Brad Marchand, you think it's awful. But, like, I don't know for sure that wasn't at least somehow accidental. But, yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see. And meanwhile, Marchand, Sean, I'm curious about this because I watched him score a second overtime goal in the last week the other night and said, I was like, man, and he's doing it without Patrice Bergeron on his line. He's so good. But does that reputation sort of preclude him from being considered or being given credit for as being as good as he really is? And I think, honestly, maybe in the Hart Trophy conversation, based on what he's done this season, but a lot of people just dismiss him out of hand because of these sort of ugly incidents.
I don't know if it hurts him too much. I mean, he was able to get that free flight to Tampa for the All-Star game in the middle of his suspension for the Johansson hit. So, but it is tough, and he is certainly a frustrating player because we've seen it now for, 6-7 years or whatever it is. He's such a great player. One of the best players in the league for sure. But then he has this other side where they're not even like on the edge type hits. They're just stupid plays. It's not like like suspensions we see all the time where we're a player with really very little history in suspensions just like David Backus the other day. It's just one of those things where it just happens because the game's so fast and unfortunately something's going to happen. But in Marchand, they're just stupid things that he puts himself in the middle of, and he doesn't need to, because obviously he's been such a valuable player to that Bruins team. This year, I don't know if you put him in the top 5 at the moment, but maybe top 10, top 15 Hart Trophy contenders right now, just the way he's played, especially with Bergeron and McAvoy being out of that lineup in the last couple of weeks. He's just, he does those plays, and they just detract from his overall game. I mean, if he had a clean record, just think of how big of how much more positive light he would be in many people's minds around the league. But he does stuff like that, and whether you think it's suspendable or not, it takes away from the great offense that he can bring to the Bruins.
Yeah, and he has, 3 game-winning goals last week. He does things, and the thing about Brad Marchand that often impresses me so much is just how he just has a knack of the puck finds him, right? And you hear people talk about this all the time, but he just puts himself in the right place at the right time all the time. And it's such a difficult guy to play against, and it really has been interesting to see how he's grown from being the junior player that he was to the NHL player that he is today. It's been a hell of a progression, and it's been fun to watch. But then every once in a while you see something like this, and you wonder, can Brad Marchand be Brad Marchand if he's not kind of doing those reckless, crazy things every once in a while? Anyway, who knows? Let's talk a little bit about, if we can, please, Sean, about the Stanley Cup playoffs, the format that the league is using right now. This is getting more scrutiny, and it always comes up every year, kind of this silly format that they use right now that rewards division winners with matchups against wildcard teams, and then forces the second and third place teams in each division to face one another. We're now in a situation where the Toronto Maple Leafs, in all likelihood, will open up the playoffs in Boston on the road, excuse me, to face off against the second best team in the Eastern Conference, the Bruins, despite the fact that the Leafs have the 3rd most points in the conference and are looking very much like they're going to be a 100-point team. Does the fact that it's the Leafs And to an extent, the Bruins, who also, given their record, probably don't deserve to face the Leafs. The fact that such high-profile teams are sort of very negatively, at least apparently, affected, and teams that probably shouldn't meet until the second or third round are meeting in the first round. Do you think this could affect any kind of meaningful change?
I don't know. I remember when they changed this format several years ago, they said they would review it with the PA every, I think it was like 2 to 3 years. And it's been about that time, if not more. And apparently the owners like it. The players don't really have an issue with it. And if it's funny, if you look at the standings right now, you look at the standings and how they're set up, especially in the East. This is what the NHL wanted. Pittsburgh and Philly first round, Boston, Toronto in first round, Winnipeg, Minnesota even out in the West, San Jose and Anaheim. I mean, those are those rivalries that the NHL envisioned when it put together this format. But then, of course, like you just said, you have these situations where you have the top 3 teams in the Atlantic are the top 3 teams in the entire Eastern Conference. So it's kind of unfair for the Bruins or the Leafs to one of those teams will be out in round 1 where they should at least consider maybe the old format, be able to get to at least a round 2. It's almost like, with the whole Sid and Ovi thing, where those 2 teams they can't meet beyond the second round in a conference final format. So it's definitely unfair. I wasn't really a big fan of them really pushing for rivalries because every couple of years you'll get Pittsburgh, Philly, you'll get Boston, Toronto, you'll get like Rangers, Islanders. From them, they met in the playoffs back in the day, but it's almost like interplay in baseball. You're gonna get the Cubs and White Sox, you get the Mets and Yankees, but then you're gonna get like Padres and Rays. You're gonna get those uninteresting first-round mashups, despite your goal of making everything a rivalry. Just go back to the 1-8 format like you had. It was fine. And no one really had any problems. Every form there's no perfect format, but I think the top 8 teams in each conference, what we had for such a long time, worked just fine for what they did.
And it's like manufacturing rivalries, right? It's something that should and does occur naturally. Is these rivalries, and we've seen it happen. I've seen it here in Montreal. The Canadiens and the Senators really ramped up with a couple of playoff series. Same with the Habs and the Lightning. And they didn't need to manufacture it. The Habs and the Bruins, for a long period of time before the Canadiens became sort of an irrelevant team nationally in the National Hockey League, they'd face the Bruins in the playoffs all the time. I mean, you excuse me, you get these rivalries naturally in hockey. That's the thing, Sean, is like I just don't get why they have to force the rivalries.
It's all about marketing the game, right? The playoffs, your best of 7. Penguins, Flyers, come for the blood, come for the the hard hitting action. You want to talk about a rivalry that's really developed naturally on its own the last 5, 6, 7 years. Penguins and Blue Jackets. All the battles with Dubinsky and Crosby in front, and the great regular season matchups they've had. Penguins fans, invading Nationwide Arena there, and obviously they met in the playoffs, twice in the last couple of years, and had some great series. So you don't need to force these rivalries because they're going to happen. During the season, you'll have those flashpoints, maybe a controversial hit or a controversial game or something that'll kind of spark a flame between these 2 teams, and potentially it'll blow over once you get into the playoffs and blow up once you get into the playoffs and kind of make a best of 7 series a little more interesting. So they might get lucky this year with a couple of those in the first round, but every year with this format, you're going to have really good teams out in round 1, which to me, if you're the owners and GMs and even the players, you should be complaining and saying that's not very fair.
Sean, thanks for your time, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Anytime, Connor.
That is Sean Leahy. You can find his work at Pro Hockey Talk and the NHL on NBC Sports. This is Hockey Primetime. The wild card seed in the playoff race of radio. Does that make any sense? No. We're a division winner here. Hottest takes. Coming up next, the NHL doesn't want coaches. Oh, do you understand goaltender interference? What is goaltender interference? What isn't goaltender interference? I know Leafs fans aren't necessarily complaining today, but they have had reason to complain this season already. Mike Babcock is certainly never held back when it comes to his views on what is and is not goaltender interference. Oh, the league has an idea. Apparently, they don't want people talking about this anymore. We will tell you that story and where Colin Campbell enters the equation next. This is Hockey Primetime on SiriusXM, NHL Network Radio, and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com. Hey, welcome back. Final moments of the show. This is Hockey Primetime. I'm Conor McKenna. Thank you to everybody for tuning in, hanging out with us. And final moments of the show. I wanted to raise this, and I heard this on Hockey Night in Canada last night. I saw a write-up on it on the Sportsnet from Mike Johnston. NHL players and coaches, we know, have been talking, right? They say stuff about goaltender interference, the goaltender interference calls, the goaltender interference non-calls. Mike Babcock has been vocal with his amazing accent. And by the way, just as an aside, if you have a chance and if you are a subscriber to The Athletic, Sean Fitzgerald did an investigation of Mike Babcock's accent, which is unlike any accent I've ever heard before. That's a must-read in The Athletic this week. But there's been too many controversial goaltender interference reviews, and apparently the league doesn't want people talking about it anymore. Colin Campbell, the guy who sent angry emails to referees who didn't give preferential treatment to his son, remember that? Who still works for the National Hockey League, runs the hockey operations department, says that it's not okay to have the type of criticism we saw from Mike Babcock earlier this week. Here's an idea. How about instead of making people stop saying things about goaltender interference, we fix the problem with goaltender interference in the National Hockey League? Doesn't that make more sense than trying to muzzle players and coaches? Colin Campbell. Anyway, that's it for us. Thanks for hanging out with us this week. Thanks to Jesse Ralph, Laura Saba, the producer and technical producers of the show, our executive producer, Sam Eng. Thank you for listening. Please check out our podcast page at hockeyprimetime.com.